Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Zimbabwe's infrastructure is falling apart. And it is all because of 44 years of gross mismanagement and rampant corruption. And unfortunately, this has only opened or encouraged, rather, the regime to be even more reckless. When Mnangagwa took over from Mugabe in 2017, he was hoping that he would be the man to revive the country's economy. His mantra was Zimbabwe is open for business. He was so sure, cocksure, that he will revive the economy, that the foreigners would flood in to take his offer, to answer his call of Zimbabwe is open for business. The foreign investment did not flood into the country. They only had to wait 8 months after the November 2017 coup, when the country had held its elections. Mnangagwa blatantly rigged the elections. And that was the confirmation, if any of them had been waiting for it. But many suspected that Zimbabwe was still very much a pariah state, ruled by corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical thugs who would rig the elections to stay in power. And so when that failed, Mnangagwa decided he was going to take the bull by the horn and develop the country himself. And so Nyika Inova was born. Except that, of course, in his case, he decided to take off the handbrakes from the corruption that was at the heart of Zimbabwe's economic activity, the only real activity in Zimbabwe, corruption. And this has opened the door for some of those who saw the opportunity to exploit the regime's weakness. This is a regime that had shown that it was determined to hang on to power at all costs. And it would rather burn down the house, ride roughshod over the ordinary Zimbabweans, just to stay in power. And so part of that stay in power at all costs meant corruption. Corruption is taken, it's into overdrive in Zimbabwe in the Mnangagwa era. It was bad enough during Mugabe's period, but now it's in overdrive. Here is a video clip of somebody talking about problems in Zimbabwe in terms of we should be careful who we sign this deals with. And in this case here, it's relating to a deal to revamp Zimbabwe's railway network. But it goes much further than that too. Just listen to it.
Our next story is from Africa, from Zimbabwe in the south. The country is planning a railway overhaul, and it has decided to go to China for help. Zimbabwe has signed a deal with the Trans-Tech Engineering Corporation. It's a subsidiary of the China Railway Group. The deal is worth $533 million. The hope is that it will breathe new life into Zimbabwe's ailing railways. So first, let's look at the present situation. This is Zimbabwe, a landlocked country in southern Africa. The country has massive mineral reserves. From high-value minerals like lithium and chrome to basics like coal, Zimbabwe has it all. But it's one thing to have mineral wealth and another to be able to profit from it. Zimbabwe has been struggling with that second part. Because even if it extracts the minerals, without transportation, they're gathering dust or going up in smoke, literally. Take this report from last month. It talks about Zimbabwe's coal industry and how it suffers due to poor railway infrastructure. Coal companies are sitting on large stockpiles and they cannot move them. These stockpiles actually spontaneously combust while waiting for transportation. It highlights the problem. Abundant supplies, but no way to address them. That is why Zimbabwe wants to refurbish its railways. Back in the 1990s, when Zimbabwe's rail network was still mostly functional, it transported 18 million tons of freight annually. In 2023, it transported just 2.2 million tons. That's less than 15% of its prime capacity. So what happened here? The simple answer is neglect. Zimbabwe's railway system is over a century old. It was built by the British, just like they built the railways in India and other former colonies. This wasn't charity, though. It was to better exploit the colonies. And once the British got the boot in 1980, Zimbabwe was on its own. That's when they got independence, 1980. And it managed fine for a few years. Then the rail system's age began to show, and the country did not invest in modernization. Over time, the system has fallen to near ruin. Now, Zimbabwe is seeking to revive it. And look at how they plan to do it. With the help of the Chinese. These two countries have a long history of working together. Unfortunately, Zimbabwe has not learned from that history. After it became independent, it was sanctioned by the West. Its government was accused of unfairly treating the white minority population. So Zimbabwe turned to China for help. It knew that Beijing would not give it lectures. This new railway deal is an extension of that old relationship, even if it comes with obvious risks, like the Chinese terms and conditions. You see, Zimbabwe is not the only country where China wants to improve railroads. In nearby Zambia and Tanzania, China is planning to spend $1 billion. This was announced in February. China will revamp a rail line linking Zambian mines to the Indian Ocean. This is to secure access to minerals, the same as with Zimbabwe. But China is not satisfied with just the minerals of Zambia. It also wants to take over the railways of Zambia under a system called Rehabilitate, Operate, and Transfer. China will revamp the railway line, and in exchange, it will control the railways for 20 to 25 years. Will Zimbabwe be fine with a similar deal? Is it willing to hand over its rail system to China? Have they done it already? Zimbabwe has been dealing with the Chinese for years. It has not brought great prosperity to the country, despite numerous deals. Why is that? Because when it comes to Beijing, the devil is in the details.
I think we can stop there. She's absolutely right. China has taken advantage of the fact that in Zimbabwe, corruption has been rampant. The economy has been a meltdown ever since the country's independence in 1980. And it has taken advantage of that to prop up the regime at the expense of being given access to the country's resources. We in Africa, in Zimbabwe in particular, we are caught up in this. It's almost becoming a vicious cycle now, because China, make no mistake about it, has benefited from exploiting Zimbabwe's resources. In return, China is the one that is keeping Zanu PF in power. China has used its resources to prop up the regime, and during elections to bankroll the regime's vote rigging machinery. And as China gets more and more involved in the country's economy, and now it really has a lot of involvement. Last week, there was a video that was circulating on the social media of the Chinese opening a big iron and steel smelter near Mvuma. It's considered to be, it will be one of the biggest in Africa. And China has been involved in Zimbabwe's power industry, power generation plants, and now in the railway. And it is heavily involved in the mining of various minerals, and including gold, diamonds, lithium, and so forth. So when it controls so much, it has now got a really big invested interest in Zimbabwe. And it is in their own interests to keep the regime that it can dictate to in power. They can revamp our railway. But will that railway be run for the best benefit of Zimbabwe or the best benefit of China? Of course, it will be the latter. And more so, particularly, like I said, China will know that it is in its own interest to keep Zanu PF in power. And so China, when it comes to elections, will go out of its way to make sure that Zanu PF, or a regime that is sympathetic to China, stays in power. So we are now really a colony of China. China, people like Mnangagwa are nothing more than the puppet on the string, and the Chinese are the one pulling the puppet strings. The longer we allow this present political system to continue, the harder it's going to be to end it. We had the opportunity to end it, particularly during the 2008 to 2018 GNU. We failed to do so. It is shocking that even now, with the benefit of hindsight, many Zimbabweans still have no clue that the primary purpose of the GNU was to implement reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. That level of ignorance is at the heart of why Zimbabwe, we are a failed state. We have got to pull our socks if we are going to stop Zanu PF selling the country out to the Chinese in particular for a song. Mnangagwa is determined to stay in power at all costs. And that means, if it means selling the country for a song, he will do so. And he is doing so. It is our responsibility as the people of Zimbabwe who can see what is happening to stop him. I know many people, the minute you say that, will be saying, how are we going to stop him? Well, we can stop Mnangagwa by stopping him rigging elections. Any other way, you can forget it. It's not going to work. Once he is in the office and he has got all the state institutions captured, you're not going to change anything. Some people talked of street protests. The regime, one of the things it has done ever since, even during Mugabe's time, was to equip the security sector. In fact, one of the reasons why Zimbabwe's economy has never performed well at all is that we have had a bloated security sector. The army, Ian Smith fought the Civil War with 2 brigades. After independence, one would have thought that with retirement and streaming, the post-independent Zimbabwe will have at most 2 brigades. After all, the war is over. Why would we need more soldiers? The shocking thing is Mugabe increased the number of brigades to 5. The police, God knows how many police officers we had, and they've been increasing over the years. The CIO, some of the people who have been in government, they will tell you there are at least 3 layers of CIOs in Zimbabwe. And in his heydays, Didmus Mutasa once posted that the regime knows what every citizen is doing. Because when you think you're in a hotel, you're being served by a waiter, that waiter is a waiter, but is also a CIO. A petrol attendant at the station, the filling station, it may be a CIO as well. A teacher in a classroom, a CIO too. Zimbabwe has become a police state. And when it comes to the police, street protests, the police are under strict orders to assume with any demonstration organized by anyone else other than Zanu PF is going to be violent. And their orders is to put it out with all the violence they can muster. So street protests will not work. The only other alternative is a military coup. We've already had one military coup, but as we know, it failed to produce any meaningful change. All we ended up doing is have a musical chair where we replaced one dictator with another. Another military coup will only stabilize the country further, and there's no guarantee that it will produce any better result. Our best option has always been to pressure the regime to implement democratic reforms to make sure we've got free, fair, and credible elections. We had the opportunity to do so during the GNU. Why so many Zimbabweans fail to grasp that basic idea, even now with the benefit of hindsight, is one of the tragedies of Zimbabwe. Even some of the people who have got university education, why are they failing to understand something as simple as that? But the truth is they are failing to do so. Ever since MDC failed to implement reforms, they've been participating in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that they're flawed, knowing fully well that by participating they're only giving Zanu PF legitimacy. But they've continued to participate out of greed. They also knew that Zanu was offering those who participate a few gravy train seats as a reward. And that is what they've been after. Again, we come back to this issue of why the ordinary Zimbabweans have failed to grasp that. One would think, for instance, the urban center electorate would see what Chamisa and company are doing. And they'll be the first one to say this is not right. And yet, surprise, surprise, the urban electorate has been the one that has been most solidly behind MDC and Triple C. They've never ever questioned what is going on. If you cannot question what is going on, how do you expect my mother, my uncle, my aunt, my nephew in the rural backwaters to question? Zimbabwe is facing a very serious problem. The looting of the country's resources in Zimbabwe is in overdrive. What the lady is talking about here is nothing new. We have heard similar stories before. Last week, there was a video clip circulating on the same theme, the serious looting of Zimbabwe's resources. I'll just close by playing that video clip.
Zimbabwe has significant lithium deposits.
Unfortunately, the moment we realized that we've got lithium, the only thing that came to our mind is to extract and export.
Dzimba dziri kutsemuka, chiutsi chiya chinobuda chihora chiri kuafekta vanhu.
Hora dzinorova idzi hadzisiri hora idzi dzeze dzana tongorova idzi ikarova pana painda kuti pasi panodengenyeka kudai nguva dikidiki yozoti uchirika kufuma kudai.
If you are to look at the economic activities that happens at the mine, women are not the first ones to be employed when there's a job.
What shall we do? How are we going to create linkages and improve the value of the lithium?
Workers at Bikita Minerals are facing several labor grievances that are happening at their workplace.
As the scramble for lithium and other so-called critical minerals unfolds, the environmental degradation being caused in the process is far-reaching.
Some of the people we spoke with, they used it to have boreholes, but now they're using a community borehole. They now have to walk a long distance.
Tragic. The only way to end this tragedy is for Zimbabweans to realize that as long as Zanu PF is able to rig the elections, this tragic story will continue and it will only get worse. The only way to stop Zanu PF rigging elections is to demand that reforms are implemented. Just because MDC, CCC failed to implement even one reform does not mean nobody else can do it. Nor does it mean that we do not need reforms anymore. We need those reforms now more than ever before. At the present moment, I will be the first one to admit that there is very little chance of getting the opposition as it is, whatever it is, this CCC as it has imploded, to force Zanu PF to implement reforms. And the chances are, it's almost a certainty, that the opposition will participate in next year's election, in 2028 elections, and thus give Zanu PF legitimacy and extend the Zanu PF rule. The best chance of getting change in Zimbabwe right now is for the ordinary Zimbabweans to stop participating in these flawed elections and force the regime to accept reforms. SADC and the AU election reports condemned the elections last year because they were flawed and illegal. The people of Zimbabwe should now unite on one very important issue, underline the problem that Zanu PF, the present Zanu PF government, is indeed illegitimate. And the idea that they can go on to hold 2028 elections without reforms is unthinkable. And we should start saying so now and not wait until a year before the elections. We must say so now. And we should stop participating in any way in the political activities of the opposition who will continue to participate in flawed elections to give the regime legitimacy. The fight must start now. Do not wait for 2027 to start the fight. We are sinking, and we are sinking fast. The longer we continue sinking, the harder it's going to be to get out of this hole. Thank you very much for listening, and have a good day.